The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Simikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Simikian.
John, we're here at the HR Stories podcast, 5 stories below in a concrete bunker, ready to talk about HR. And folks, it's me, Chuck Simikian, your HR co-host with John T. Thalheimer. I was going to call you Esquire, but that would make you an attorney. So I don't know. Is there like another title I can give you? Some sort of nobility? Sir John.
Oh,
Sir
you can
John
call me
T.
Sir John.
Okay. Sir
I have
John.
not been knighted, but yeah.
Well, there's weird things that happen. It could happen. I will tell you, I love our podcast. Favorite podcast of Chuck Simikian is the HR Stories podcast. But there's this one podcast I listen to. It's called I'm just going to give them a little plug. It's called the Weird Things Podcast. And these are three guys, including one of my favorite authors, a guy named Andrew Main. And they just sit around and they just talk about weird things, in science, in UFOs, real science, fake science, with just, AI stuff. And it's great. So I thought, you know what? There's a lot of weird things out there. And I started thinking about HR, and I see so many things come across, and, our HR Team of One Facebook page, John, I started thinking there's a lot of weird and wacky HR stuff. So I thought we could do a Weird Things podcast, HR Stories, and you gave the assist. You posted on the HR Team of One this idea, and we got all kind of great stories, weird HR, weird and wacky HR, and it's almost like gossip hour. So I'd love to get into those things, but is there anything you want to kick off about? I mean, we do have the Ultimate Guide of HR Checklist Edition to talk a little bit about, but I've talked so much. That's not so weird because I tend to do that. So talk to me, John. Talk to me.
It reminds me of like what happens when you put a bunch of speakers in the same room and it just becomes this, they're all talking at the same time. You can't get a word in edgewise and you're like, oh my goodness, what? Today was an unusual day. I didn't have any client calls. I didn't have any consultations I was doing. I didn't have any coaching sessions I was doing. I literally went all day without talking to another person other than my wife. And I think we had like 10 sentences throughout the day. And I got done at the end of the day. I'm like, that was really weird. I didn't talk to anybody today. So I'm ready to talk. I have lots of things to talk about. But I love this concept of the weird and the interesting things that happen in the HR realm. And when you sent this idea to me, I'm like, yes, let's do it. One of my favorite comments on my post was, this should be a weekly thing. So I don't know if we'll do it weekly, but we may do it monthly. Like we may put on our Facebook page, like, all right, this is a Weird Wednesday. Tell us what weird things have happened to you since the last time we did this post. And there's so many fun, great stories. And Chuck, don't forget, when we have to pick our favorites, and that person is going to get a free copy of the Ultimate Book, an Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition.
Excellent. Is that a book that's available now, John? Is it coming up? Because I've heard of it. Do you know anything more about it?
Yeah. Well, Chuck, I hope you know a little more about it and where to get it. So it's in pre-launch phase now. So it is available. And it's available at our website, the ultimate guide to HR.com. That's where you will find it. So it is available there. We're going to launch it in September. And so definitely turn into that. We'll have some fun along the way. Here's the thing that I would suggest. Go to the team at hrstories.com and sign up for our newsletter, because between now and probably the end of October, maybe not the end of October, end of September, we're going to be talking about the book and also giving away free checklists. So definitely do that as well. And it's also a great way to stay in touch with us. We do a monthly newsletter, and then we talk about the podcast, and we do a bunch of things on there. So definitely jump in and sign up for that.
Yeah, not so weird, but very cool. It will give you all the answers that you're looking for, especially if you're just getting into HR or management or so. So, John, how do you want to kind of get this going? Get the engine, pull that cord on that lawnmower, get it going.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, right? Because when we work in employment management, in HR, we're dealing with humans. And humans can be interesting at times. And a lot of times we find ourselves in the weird situations. I'm going to have to actually, I'm going to skip that one. Because it was one of your stories and I don't want to share it because it's not for me to share. But so I worked many jobs, many places and that kind of stuff. And this was kind of weird, kind of different. So at the time, I was a manager. And so I took on this role of manager at this theater company. And I had teams there that were working. They would work 2 shows a day. So we'd work a show in the afternoon, and then we had a show in the evening. And it was really interesting when I came in. And the first week I started checking the time clocks, I noticed people were punching in before the first show and punching out after the second show. But they were leaving for 3 hours in the middle of the day. And so I had to correct that, which, I mean, again, right? Not weird, but not really the way to get started in the company, to be like, guys, you can't do this. And so what's like for you, what's your weirdest, or just like what story pops up when you think about weird in the workplace?
Oh, me? Oh, well, we got a lot on our posting, but one of the weirdest stories I ever had, where I had a manager that decided to go outside, hide behind a fence, and smoke a cigarette. And while he was huddled down behind this fence where no one could see him, had an employee decide to see an iguana running around, decided to pull out his air gun rifle from his truck and try and take a couple of shots at the iguana, missing the iguana, but this pellet went all the way through the fence, a perfect, just right through a slit in the fence. And while this employee was smoking, had his hand out, a pellet went all the way into his hand and shot him. And that's actually was a pretty big and bad situation as far as an employee injury, but that was pretty wacky. That I would have employees at this former company running around with their air guns trying to shoot iguanas. That was weird and wacky.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely weird and wacky.
But how about this one, John, from our Facebook? And we should almost call this the gossip hour, because some of this stuff, so this is from one of our members. She says she had an employee ask for vacation. And he says, "Hey, I'm taking the wife and kids on a trip for the week." Cool. But during the week he's gone, his wife calls me and asks if I could try and call her husband out in the field. Okay, that's quote. "Call my husband out in the field. I can't get him on my cell phone." I just told her, sure. I did call him and asked him to please call his wife if he gets a minute while he's on vacation. quote, with his family. So folks, if you didn't get that, basically the employee says to the wife, hey, I'm going out in the field for the week. I'll be gone. And the wife tries to call him, and he's really not in the field. So I thought that was pretty crazy, huh? A little gossip.
Yeah, I mean, right? I mean, the question is how many times that answers, and to be like, hey, I'm taking my wife and I'm going to go on vacation. Like, I think I would have been like, hey, I'm going to be on vacation.
Right.
I don't know if I would have been like, hey, well, anyway, I don't think I would get myself into that situation, but I'm there. All right, I got one for you, Chuck.
Okay.
So again, from our Facebook group, one of our HR departments of one had an employee who wanted to consult his tarot cards before making any business decisions.
Oh, okay.
Right? Okay, I get that. We get into that. We're making those things, but wanted me to extend our meeting times in order to accommodate the time he would need to consult his tarot cards. He also wanted me to allow him to teach our receptionist how to commune with the office products so she would know when the copier was out of paper or when the stapler was about to run out of staples.
Okay. So, John, could we say it could have been a religious accommodation? Like maybe there's a religious accommodation angle. I don't know.
Well, I mean, okay. Did they have a seriously held belief that they needed to use tarot cards to make those decisions? Possible. But I think that second part, when you're asking somebody else to commune with office products, yeah. And my favorite part of this thing, Chuck, is they said, I called the state workforce agency for termination guidance, and they passed me around, making me tell the story 6 times.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh,
that's great.
What we have to face in there.
Yeah. So yeah, these just keep coming. Did you have another favorite one here? I see a few. We had one of our folks just threw out a few things about about job candidates qualified for role, picking at a scab repeatedly, then gush blood on herself and me as I tried to help clean her up. But the good news is we ended up hiring her.
Yeah, that's my favorite part of that story, right? There they were, they hired her. My favorite has to be they had an employee show up to resign in their pajamas.
Oh. Yeah.
And today I have to say, like, it's hard sometimes to tell what are pajamas and what are people's clothes. So I'm just saying it. That's the old guy.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, so.
Oh, here's another one.
How about the nose picker? One. Okay, you go.
No, not the nose picker. During a termination, an employee called their mother, put them on the speakerphone, and the poor mother tried to advocate for their adult child not to be fired. Have you ever had that, Chuck? Where the parent called you about one of their adult kids, quote unquote?
Yeah, we have. I have. And it gets a little dicey when the adult child's parent is working in the same company and they want to talk to you. What's going on? Yeah. What's going on with my son? So yeah, it can get uncomfortable.
How do you handle that? How do you handle
basically, that? Look, as I've gotten older and I've had kids, I will say, look, I have to tell you, I understand where you're coming from. I have a son, I have a daughter too, and if I was in your position, I would want to know what's going on. But you need to understand, I can't really talk about it. They can tell you about it. I can't. But you need to be able to understand also that What is happening is I'm giving due diligence. I'm making sure we follow through and we give them the chance that they need, blah, 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 that sort of thing. So they know that I'm not just something under the rug is happening. And a lot of times that works. But yeah, that does happen. And I feel bad sometimes for the parents, you know.
I feel bad for the adult kids.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, really, I mean, again, it depends on the situation, right? I know their parents need to advocate for some children, blah, blah, blah. I get that. But just on the surface of it, like you can't have a conversation with your manager. Now again, maybe 18, 19, I get it. You haven't worked anywhere yet, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, no, I've run into that, I think, like once. And it was somebody that was probably 18 and a half type of thing. So
yeah, this one of our posters here on the HR team of one, she has a bunch of these. I mean, just a bunch. Canada had a nervous tick of nose picking, not all the way to be gross, but still didn't seem aware of it, picking his nose. I did not shake his hand at the end of the interview. Employee came into work about midday, mentioned to me that the cottage he stayed in had bed bugs and that his friends had them now at their house too. I asked him to go home, not return until he confirmed his home and suitcases didn't have bed bugs as well. Because, I will tell you, bed bugs are a scourge. They can come in on your shoe. They can come in on your pant legs, and you bring them in. You sit down.
Yeah.
They'll come into your house, other people's house, into the office. It is crazy stuff like that.
So speaking of bed bugs, it reminds me. So I forgot when it was. This was probably like 10, maybe 15 years ago. Bed bugs were really bad in the South or somewhere. And so we went to visit my dad, and he's like, you can't bring your suitcase into the house. I'm like, why not? He goes, I don't want to get bed bugs in this house. And so we had to leave our suitcase in the garage and just take the clothes and stuff we needed out of it. And so luckily we did not bring bed bugs into my dad's house, because that would have been the end of it.
Yeah. Well, I want to get into our main stories, John. I actually have two kind of stories that were in the news, that were in the courts, that I thought, oh, this is perfect for that episode. But I want to ask you, I know you take a lot of pictures, right? You're into art and such. Have you ever taken your boudoir pictures, the glamour shot pictures of you in your negligees and gone to work? Because this story here from one of our listeners, and Weird and Wacky HR, an employee showed up with her boudoir pictures. I guess boudoir means like I'm in the bed, I'm naked, I'm in my lingerie, and she's showing them to all her teammates.
Yeah, and I have to say that if they're done very artfully, and she's proud of them, again, I don't know if I would bring them into the office place. And again, it's depending on the familiarity of the office workers and that kind of stuff. I had on one of my staff, I had a photographer that took boudoir pictures. And so he would bring them in and say, check this out. And look, this is what I did this weekend and that kind of stuff. No one was really offended by it or upset by it. It was just, that was what he did for a living. And so, I mean, not for a living, but as part.
I guess it would be
as a gig.
I guess it would be those things about like, if it's offensive, if people are offended, people don't want to see it, know who you're showing them to, know who you're not showing them to. But yeah, I mean, this is something we talk about in sexual harassment class all the time.
Yeah, I would not bring them in, right? I mean, again, I would not suggest anybody bring them in. I don't want a rash of people doing it. In one instances, that one company, that one place that I was working, it made sense. It wasn't, no one was offended or that kind of stuff. So ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the HR Stories podcast. We are so excited that you're here. Thank you for listening. Please make sure you're telling your friends and families about our podcast. We are trying to raise the number of subscribers up. So definitely make sure you're subscribing. Make sure you're listening every Tuesday when they come out. And like us, write reviews. Let's try to boost this up so we can reach more people. That's our goal, to reach more people, to help more people. And so doing that is great. So thank you. You've been listening to the HR Stories podcast. We will be right back after this break. Hi, it's me, John, from the team at HR Stories. We are often asked, how do I get better at HR? The simple answer is by practicing it. But as with most things in life, it isn't that easy. We make the best HR decisions when we have the knowledge, the systems, and guidance in place. Chuck and I founded the team at HR Stories to help HR practitioners get HR right. We are passionate about giving you the tools to excel at your job. For more information about upcoming workshops, resources, and our latest blogs, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Together, we are the team at HR Stories. Thank you. You've been listening to the HR Stories podcast. Welcome back, everyone, from the break. It's Chuck and John. We are here this week talking about weird things that happen in HR. So there's a lot of things, right? Little mysterious things that pop up. We just told a bunch of stories that were actually kind of funny and sad at the same time. And so I know, Chuck, you got a couple great stories. I'm kind of interested in listening to these and trying to figure out, like, how would I deal with it? I'm going to be honest with you, Chuck. I haven't read them.
Good.
And so I'm going to be interested, like, how would I, like, I'm going to be thinking the whole time, this is what I want you to do, listeners. Think about, how would you deal with this? If this situation came up, how would you deal with it? And then let us know. Like, that's how again, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about how we would deal with it. But then kind of give us your thoughts. We always want to hear from you, so make sure you do that. You can send a text to us. So go down into your show notes. You'll see it on top of it says send text to the team. Send us a text. We get them, and we'll get back there.
All right, John. So this first story is called Who's Harassing Whom? Who's harassing whom? So in HR, investigations, obviously, into misconduct are part of our job. We do it. I do it all the time. Maybe a big investigation, small investigation, but especially when it involves serious accusations like sexual harassment. And even though it can be straightforward, there are cases that can take an unexpected turn that basically leaves everyone surprised. And when those tables turn and the accused claims to be one of the harassed, well, that becomes a truly bizarre case that in this situation did take that unexpected twist, leaving, well, HR professionals and myself and legal experts, by the way, because it's still an open issue, scratching their heads.
I'm ready to hear the story. I'm ready. Let's dive in.
Diving in. So let's meet Professor Wright, Wright. Professor Wright, he was a high-profile law professor, had a great resume, prestigious positions, consulting roles, worked for with a lot of tech companies like Google and Meta, and he was actually a government official at one point. But in the summer of 2023, not too long ago, his career took a nosedive when a series of sexual misconduct allegations came to light. So he's a professor at George Mason University. And these allegations basically spanned almost 2 decades. So but in 2023, though, these 2 former students, Elise Dorsey and Angela Landry, they accused Professor Wright of using his position to pressure them into sexual relationships. Now, when the accusations surfaced publicly, he resigned his position rather than face termination. However, he didn't go quietly. So here's the twist. He then files a $108 million defamation lawsuit against Dorsey and Landry, accusing them of trying to destroy his career. But that wasn't the end. Then he sues George Mason University, saying the investigation and his conduct was biased and was sex discrimination against him as a man. And, as this unfolds, there's wide-reaching consequences because he had consulting agreements with Google and Meta, and they continued to work with him despite allegations over the years, but they eventually cut ties. And here's the interesting thing. He had a lot of legal, personal, financial disputes, including issues with his spousal and child support payments. John, this guy was paying $35,000 a month in child support and alimony, $35,000 a month. And when he lost his job, his wife sued him because of not only because he was missing child support, but because he lost his job because of sexual misconduct. It's just a crazy, twisty story.
So was it ever settled? Did he win? Did he lose? Where are we on this case craziness?
Sure. So as of December 2023, it is still actually an active case. It's kind of bouncing around the courts right now, but there's no conclusion yet.
So what he is saying is that the person who did the investigation, or the people that did the investigation, basically, because he was a man, said, all right, well, we don't, and I'm not saying that this is true. I'm just saying this is what he's saying, that the man, because I'm a man, you automatically assume that I'm wrong and that I couldn't have consensual relationships with these individuals. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where this plays out, because I think that becomes the he said, she said, which we deal with a lot in HR, right? So we'll have situations where we need to talk to employees. Sometimes it's sexual harassment. Other times it's just people don't get along. And so we're having these conversations and we get into that he said, she said things. And so one of the things that I'm thinking that I would recommend is, if we're doing those investigations, clear, concise, unbiased, factual documentation is critical to the company, the employer, right? In the end, the employer being able to say, no, we did the investigation. This is what we found. Here's our factual documents that we found. This is why we made that decision. Has to be critical.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened here, there's so much more to the story, but I apparently, he's not arguing that there was a relationship between the two of them. In the end, what happened was he's saying that if it's consensual, and by the way, he set these two ladies up with jobs and contacts, and I think one of them he set up with an apartment. So there was a lot. But the interesting thing, when you dig into his background, throughout like 20 years or so, there were all kind of accusations from other places that he worked. And I think the critical lesson here, outside of do your reference checks. And I know people are like, oh, you don't get anything in reference, but you might find something, right? And I think there was smoke here over the years. But the bottom line is, even if a relationship appears to be consensual, those power dynamics between a manager and an employee, or a student and a professor, can create, well, pretty big ethical and legal risks that can lead to all kind of complications, accusations of misconduct, conflicts of interest, and ultimately, legal action.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting case, and it is weird because of, it's not weird because I think we're hearing a lot about this in the thing, and I think some of people are like, look, we'll just go after, I'll sue them. I'll sue them and try to deflect what actually happened, right? Which is the sad part of this. And unfortunately, unfortunately, we added to this. These two young ladies had gone through the ringer, and now their name is on our podcast. Probably not the best thing to do, right? And so I do think that's something that we need to be more aware of. But I also think like there is a downside to this, and that's why we see a lot of individuals going, I'm not going forward because it's not worth that to happen to me. And a lot of times when sexual harassment is happening in the workplace, we do not know about it because that person exits. That person leaves the company and makes that choice. And it's only when they don't feel they don't feel that there's a place to go, like they can't leave the company. That's typically when they are, I have no other choice but to come forward. And so I think that happens. So,
yeah, and I think, by the way, John, calling him Professor Wright might have given him too much credit. His name is Josh. Okay, Josh Wright. Joshua Wright is his name, and you could even Google this, and you'll see pictures and everything of these folks. So, anyways, bottom line is maintain professional boundaries, protect yourself as a manager, protect your organization. And especially in environments like academia, the workplace, where that imbalance of power can, lead to negative consequences. So that was story one. Story two, the Chicken Plant Chronicles. And yeah, and it is, and I'm going to go through this, but there is a jaw-dropper twist at the end of this. And I cannot wait to get to the end on this one. So this is a wild.
Now you're setting yourself up.
I know. But when I read this and when I did the research into this and I got to the end of this, I was like, whoa. So this is from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Okay, 11th Circuit Court. So this actually went to trial. This is a chicken processing plant in Alabama. An employee was named Irish Jenkins. He's an inventory clerk. He actually had been in not that this is part of the story, but he had been in jail. He'd been in jail, had gotten out, his first job out of jail was at this chicken processing plant. But you know what? The guy was pretty good at what he did. He was well liked. A lot of people liked him, and he moved up to inventory clerk. So he's doing fine, but he finds himself embroiled in a kind of a complicated situation. So according to Mr. Jenkins, he was repeatedly propositioned by a manager at the facility. Her name was Melissa McDickinson. Melissa McDickinson. And eventually they did enter into a consensual relationship. Sexual relationship with secretive encounters happening right in her office. Okay, but things take a bizarre twist, John, when Jenkins claims that McDickinson's boss, Melissa's boss, David Birchfield, who was rumored to be romantically involved with her as well, pressured him to allow him to watch their encounters. But that's not the twist.
So just to be clear, Irish Jenkins is a male. Melissa, the one doing the sexual harassment, is female.
Yes.
And then we have this third party, David, who's also male.
Yes. And David is Melissa's boss.
Just want to make sure I get you the players. Because you kind of went over Melissa's name very quickly, and I just wanted to make sure our listeners got that.
Sorry, and David is Melissa's boss. And David was actually rumored to already be involved with Melissa. So Melissa's got two boyfriends at work, basically. Okay? And so David, the boss, says, hey, I want to see you have sex in the office. And but Jenkins like, you got the wrong guy because I'm not going to do that. So he's terminated from his position. but he believes his firing was in retaliation for rejecting David Birchfield's request. But the company then argued that his termination was due to excessive absences, too many smoke breaks, and not because of this refusal. And so it goes to court. And in May of 2024, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals dismissed Irish Jenkins' claim of sexual harassment and gender bias, and they ruled in favor of the company. How could they do that, you might ask? Well, the court finds that because the relationship was consensual, the behavior did not constitute unlawful harassment. And here's the deal. The court said neither Melissa McDickinson nor David Birchfield, the manager and the director, none of them were involved in the decision to terminate Jenkins' employment. Now, are you ready for the kicker?
I am ready for the kicker.
All right, so here's the kicker that takes this story to the next level. Melissa McDickinson wasn't just any manager. She was the HR manager of the plant. Yeah. And you know what that makes David Birchfield if he's Melissa's boss?
The director of HR?
The director of HR. That's right. The very people who are supposed to protect employees from these kind of situations and protect the company, they were the ones at the center of this twisted saga. So, boom, drop the mic and move on.
That's just crazy. That's just crazy because, and so I want to go back, right?
Okay.
And so was this completely thrown out? Was this completely thrown out? Or was the appeals court they wouldn't know?
This was only in May, so that's maybe from this podcast recording 4 months ago, 3-4 months ago. So at this point, I researched this pretty deep. I did not find any appeals going on. I want to say there's a whole court case on this, a lot deeper, and it gets very salacious, right? But I think they just dropped it at the end. I think someone told Mr. Jenkins, "Look, guess what? Even though it looks bad,
it's not worth it."
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, to me, because of what you said in that last story, right? You were talking about this power differential. Think about the power differential with an HR manager and the HR director. But was it sexual harassment? Did it rise to that occasion? I guess not. It was consensual. And if they had proof that those two were not involved in the decision, which makes me hard to believe that an HR director wasn't involved in the decision, but obviously they proved that in court. So, all right, to me, I'm just flabbergasted about that whole HR thing. And I'm flabbergasted I'm not, right? Because we know that there are tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of great HR people. We also know that there are people that aren't so great. And I think that's in every field, in every position, in every role. There are just people that are not taking care of the people that should be taken care of. And so I know our listeners here, because they want to get better, they want to do better. And they're not running into this, or they're not getting into these situations. But boy, we really need to be careful of how we handle ourselves in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reminder, once again, personal relationships can lead to damaging situations, especially if you're in HR, having relationships with other people in the company. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Keep your professional and personal life separate. You'll be able to do your job much better. So with that, we drop the mic on the Weird Things HR Stories podcast, starting off with Gossip Hour and then a couple of stories. And I got to tell you, I saw a couple of other things out there when I was doing these. There's so many that I'm looking forward to creating a whole podcast episode based on a couple of things that I saw that I think you'll love. You'll love. But I don't want to drop. I don't want to drop any hints now.
No teasing.
No teasing. Well, okay. What about your? And I think. No, I'm not going to say it. Not going to say it. Zip. You got to tune in next week.
Zip. I'll just give a hint. If you're watching on YouTube, I give a hint. And so, what was I going to say? Oh, one of the things that I think that really comes to mind, like this is, I mean, there's tons of lessons from all these stories and that kind of stuff. But one of the lessons that I take away from this, Chuck, is that we talk a lot about on this podcast, the legal ramifications, right? The legal ramifications. But there's this whole gray area, which isn't legal and isn't normal business, right? And that we in HR have to deal with, right? So going back to bad manners in interviews, people doing stupid things in the workplace, right? All those kind of things happen. And we, by our very role, managing those employees, we need to step up and deal with. And I want to hear other people's stories. I know those aren't the only stories out there, because I want to dive a little more into that gray area as we go forward with our podcast, because I think that's where, as HR practitioners and professionals, we have the most questions in that gray area. Like, how do I deal with this? Somebody put on on the weird and wacky post, having the body odor conversation, right? And I think that's a hard conversation. We've all had it, right? We've all had that in HR. And so I think that I want to hear more of those stories. I want to talk those things up, because I want to be able to give people like, okay, here's the things you should be thinking about in that situation.
Yeah. Absolutely. Folks, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. Don't forget, Ultimate Guide to HR.com, Ultimate Guide to HR.com. Check out our new book. And John, I got to tell you, I've seen things for sex in the workplace over my career, but this place was called Cook Foods in Alabama, chicken processing plant. I just can't imagine. It just, I don't know. It doesn't sound very romantic. Doesn't sound very fun. So folks, have fun out there, but be safe.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.